And UNRWA is supposed to be a Palestinian aid organization, but after October 7th, its deep ties to Hamas terrorists has come into the spotlight after its so-called aid workers were found to have even taken part in the massacre of Israelis, while thousands of its employees were found to have glorified the attack. And now, in a first, a new lawsuit filed on behalf of families of October 7th victims is directly taking on UNRWA for its role on October 7th. Joining us now with more on this lawsuit is attorney and CEO of the International Legal Forum, Arsen Ostrovsky, who is part of the legal team taking this action. Arsen, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
So your organization's involved in the lawsuit filing on behalf of the families of the victims of October 7th. What can you tell us about the lawsuit?
I think first we have to put this in context. There can be no more ifs, buts, or maybes. UNRWA has become an inseparable and indistinguishable arm of Hamas. It has become an incubator for hate, incitement, and terrorism. There are those who say it's just a few rotten apples, but the fact of the matter is, this organization has become rotten to the core and infested with terrorism, and we have to hold responsible not only the perpetrators Hamas, but those that enable and support them, like UNRWA USA, which is UNRWA's primary fundraising vehicle in the United States, which knowingly and systematically, despite the overwhelming evidence, continued to fund UNRWA and send them $3.8 million last year alone in donations. This is money that helped fund the massacre, the rape, the abductions, and the torture of Israelis. And
so what do the families of the victims, what do they hope to achieve with this lawsuit?
Look, there's a group of survivors that are part of this claim. Some are survivors of the Nova Music Festival. Some are families of hostages like Lishai Levi, whose husband Omri has been held hostage for over 150 days now. I think there's a couple of things. One, the families want some kind of semblance of justice. They want to make sure that the perpetrators are held responsible. They also want to make sure those that support, enable, and fund and allow these kinds of crimes and on the ongoing captivity of Israelis to be held accountable for their actions as well.
And, you know, we're seeing in recent days Canada, EU, other countries saying that they're going to resume funding for UNRWA, even though, as you mentioned, now its complicity in terrorism is quite clear. There was supposed to be a major investigation into UNRWA, into its ties to Hamas, ties to terror. What's happened with this investigation? I mean, where does UNRWA stand today?
Look, first of all, asking UNRWA to investigate itself is like asking a pyromaniac to investigate the cause of a fire. Now, this investigation has not gone anywhere to date, and notwithstanding that, countries like Canada, like Sweden, and we can only presume others will follow, have said, you know what, we don't even have to worry about those investigations, which haven't even been carried out yet, but we're going to resume our funding. Now, this is a negligent decision. This is an awful decision that will only continue to perpetuate and continue funding the kinds of atrocities that we saw, and furthermore, the ongoing captivity of the hostages that remain captive in Gaza.
You know, as we're speaking, just today, the UN Security Council has convened after 5 months. At the request of the United States, the UK, and France to discuss the rape that took place on October 7th, which the UN has finally acknowledged. So really, you know, you mentioned, how can UNRWA investigate itself? How can Israel ever trust UNRWA again? How can any country trust UNRWA again after, you know, what's been revealed, or the UN for that matter?
Look, I mean, I think no one can trust UNRWA ever again, and quite frankly, no one ought to have trusted UNRWA before this as well. You know, the explosive allegations that we saw in the last month about UNRWA staff being involved in the massacre itself, in the abduction, in carrying out these attacks, in holding Israelis captive and hostage in Gaza. Now, as shocking as this was, it ought not to have been shocking, because we've been saying for years and years that UNRWA is infested with Hamas terrorism. UNRWA is involved in incitement. They're involved in helping cover up the rockets that are being stored there. So none of that ought to have come as any shock. UNRWA has no role to play in Gaza, no role to play in the Middle East. UNRWA only perpetuates the conflict. It is part of the problem, not the solution, and it should be disbanded and defunded altogether once and for all.
And, you know, on the one hand, some countries are resuming funding, as we said, but on the other hand, UNRWA is claiming that it's, you know, threatening its own demise, sort of saying that it's about to run out of money. So, you know, where does UNRWA stand today in terms of its ability to continue its work?
Look, I think UNRWA has ample money as we at this particular point, and I think a large part of it is UNRWA sort of trying to manufacture a much bigger crisis in terms of its funding than they really are in, because the funding that has been paused to date is essentially future funding. They have money in the bank account as we speak. It is a matter of priorities for them, and we know their priorities include covering up for a lot of the crimes that Hamas committed. So they have sufficient funds, but quite frankly, those funds would be much better off going to the actual victims of the Hamas terrorism than perpetuating this ongoing conflict. UNRWA has become an impediment to peace. All they're doing is perpetuating this, this conflict, this violence, this ongoing relentless incitement. There are other agencies, other ways, other mechanisms through which you can get aid to the people of Gaza that really do need it, and not in the hands of Hamas.
And of course, through this lawsuit, hopefully UNRWA will be held accountable for its actions on October 7th. Arsen Ostrovsky, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.